Hello everyone and happy Pride. My name is Elissa Dehart and I'm so excited to be here today. Thank you for joining me to learn more about diet culture's impact on LGBTQIA plus body image. I want to start by saying I'm a little nervous. This is my first time doing anything like this, so please bear with me through any awkwardness. I'd also like to take this opportunity to give you a content warning. There will be talk about racism, transphobia and misgendering, eating disorders, suicide and self-harm, and religion. To understand the harm that diet culture does, we first need to know what it is. And that can be tricky because diet culture often hides in plain sight, under the pretenses of health and wellness or fitness, labeling foods as junk or super, worshiping thin bodies, and policing and demonizing larger bodies. Author, activist, and lecturer Fergie Tavar says, "Diet culture does one thing very successfully. It alienates us from our natural relationship to food and movement, things that we as humans have had a relationship to since the beginning of time, and which we cannot live without. And it sells them back to us as diet and exercise, with the promise that with hard work and self-denial, we can achieve a state worthy of love, respect, and admiration." So why does diet culture even exist? Let's look at some of the pretty problematic roots of diet culture. Belgian statistician Adolf Koedler is the father of the body mass index. In his book, A Treatise on Man and the Development of His Faculties, he wrote, "If the average man were completely determined, we might consider him as the type of perfection, and everything differing from his proportion or condition would constitute deformity or disease, or monstrosity." Koedler harvested his data from French and Scottish men, and his text published in 1835 was used by his contemporaries as a launching point for the eugenics movement in the late 19th century. The widespread usage of BMI in healthcare in our school's curriculum is inherently racist and weight biased, and completely disregards the health and norms of other races, ethnicities, cultures, even geographic locations. Around the same time, in the 1830s, Sylvester Graham was creating an entire theology, diet, and lifestyle regimen designed to make and keep his followers pure and healthy. He's the father of graham crackers and diet culture as we know it today. Graham was against preservatives in food, eating meat, consumption of alcohol, soft beds, warm baths, and masturbation. Seriously. Graham believed these things corrupted people's souls and bodies and were a detriment to society at large. Graham believed that masturbation caused blindness and even premature death, and that by eating bland food, you could prevent the sexual urges that led to masturbation. Fun fact, John Harvey Kellogg, who gave us granola cereal and cornflakes, was a follower of Graham's theology. These men promoted a Puritan way of thinking about food, assigning a moral value to the foods that we eat. Modern day diet culture expounds on Graham's philosophy by moralizing not only food, but body size as well. The only thing anyone can accurately diagnose when looking at a fat person is their own level of weight prejudice. That's a quote from Marilyn Wan, weight diversity speaker, author, and activist. Who does diet culture benefit? We have to ask the question because diets don't work. In an analysis of almost 30 separate studies that tracked weight loss over the course of 5 years, less than 2% of people maintained their weight loss. And in fact, dieting and weight cycling is actually proven to increase inflammation, which is a risk factor for diabetes and heart disease. Additionally, studies show that the bigger the gap between someone's ideal body and their actual body size is a better indicator of mental and physical health than the BMI scale. Additionally, social determinants of health have far more effect than diet and exercise. Social determinants of health include things like level of education, employment, food security, access to housing, and healthcare. So why diet culture? Who does it benefit? From her book, The Beauty Myth, Naomi Wolf writes, "A culture fixated on female thinness is not an obsession about female beauty, but an obsession about female obedience. Dieting is the most potent political sedative in women's history. A quietly mad population is a tractable one. When we're preoccupied with food and busy working to achieve the ideal body, how do we possibly have time to change the world, to organize, to dismantle systems of oppression, to enjoy life? We don't. We can't possibly when we're preoccupied with maintaining diet culture status quo. We must learn to identify diet culture in all of its disguises so we can critically look at it and its subsequent fat phobia and anti-Blackness. It takes work, but like all things, we can unlearn diet culture too. Now, I've talked a lot about diet culture in relation to white men and the burden they've placed onto white femininity, but diet culture, as it's the water we swim in, affects us all. Diet culture perpetuates eating disorders by encouraging restriction and upholding unattainable physiques. Men are not immune from body image struggles and eating disorders and are pressured to be hypermuscular, especially for Black and Indigenous people of color and LGBTQ+ individuals. Bigorexia affects hundreds of thousands of men and is identified in the DSM-5 as a body dysmorphic disorder, where you think your body isn't muscular enough, it's too small, just isn't big enough. For some, the preoccupation is so devastating that they will train through broken bones or even lose their job before disrupting training schedules. As we delve more into how gender can be further complicated by diet culture, we see studies showing that some non-binary people, whether subconsciously or intentionally, strive for thinness in order to achieve the ideal form of androgyny. Trans women may feel pressured into making their bodies smaller as an expression of that brand of femininity that's expected from diet culture. As I'm starting to talk about eating disorders and research studies, one thing needs to be made clear. Eating disorder research is painfully underfunded in the USA compared to other psychiatric conditions. In addition to being underfunded, eating disorder research is still largely influenced by biases in a white, male-dominated medical field. Our base of knowledge of eating disorders was compiled by such men, and the data harvested was mostly taken from thin, cisgendered white women with access to healthcare. Even modern-day studies that include non-white and LGBTQ identities, the research uses diagnostic tools and frameworks which were built for thin, cishet women. This makes accurate estimates of eating disorders in these populations hard, with many cases going unreported and untreated. I'm going to add a content warning, again, for medical racism and anti-Blackness, because the study I'm sharing now is very disturbing. Here's the facts about this study. In one study, clinicians were presented with identical cases demonstrating disordered eating symptoms in white, Hispanic, and Black women. Clinicians were then asked to identify if the women's eating behavior was problematic. 44% identified the white woman's behavior as problematic. 41% identified the Hispanic woman's behavior as problematic. And only 17% identified the Black women's behavior as problematic. Additionally, the clinicians were also less likely to recommend that the Black women in the study receive professional help. This study reflects the findings of other studies which show us that Black people are significantly less likely than white people to have been asked by a doctor about eating disorder symptoms, and that Black people with eating disorders are half as likely to be diagnosed or to receive treatment. Even more troubling, research indicates that starting at age 12 and continuing through their teen years, non-white youth have a higher prevalence of eating disorders than their white peers. It's no wonder then why research continues to show that Black and Indigenous people of color, LGBTQ+ individuals, along with men, are less likely to seek treatment for eating disorders, citing cultural differences, fear of rejection, and discrimination. But eating disorders don't discriminate. Even so, LGBTQ+ individuals face increased risk factors. And I'd like to add another content warning here for homophobia and transphobia. So, according to NIDA, the risk factors making our community more susceptible to eating disorders are minority stress. Stigma, prejudice, and discrimination create a hostile and stressful social environment that causes mental health problems. Fear of rejection or experience of rejections by friends, families, and coworkers. Internalized negative messages, beliefs about oneself due to sexual orientation, non-normative gender expressions, or transgender identity. Experiences of violence and post-traumatic stress disorder, which research shows sharply increases vulnerability to an eating disorder. Discrimination due to one's sexual orientation and/or gender identity. Being a victim of bullying due to one's sexual orientation and/or gender identity. Discordance between one's biological sex and gender identity. And inability to meet body image ideals within some LGBTQ+ cultural contexts. So following up on those risk factors, here's some numbers. 54%. That's the number of LGBTQ+ youth that have been diagnosed with an eating disorder. Another 21% of those youth surveyed said that they suspected that they had an eating disorder. All in all, that's 3 in 4 LGBTQ+ youth who report struggling with disordered eating and body image. 42% of men diagnosed with an eating disorder identify as gay, even though gay men statistically make up 5% of the total male population. In a survey of university students, transgender individuals had as much as 4 times the odds of engaging in disordered eating compared with their cisgender peers. 66% of those who have considered suicide have been diagnosed with an eating disorder. Every 62 minutes, at least one person dies as the direct result of an eating disorder. So what can we do? How can we help each other? Rebecca Tausig, writer, says, "The body positive movement doesn't put people with disabilities and other marginalized bodies into the foreground. Body neutrality, I think, has the power to be really useful, in particular to people with disabilities, especially those with chronic pain or people with diagnoses that are progressive. Those people are pretty frustrated with the demand to love their bodies when they feel betrayed by them. Being neutral could feel like a relief." And from Megan Jane Crabb, author, "If we're only having conversations about body image and not about body politics, then we're not fighting for all bodies, just our own bodies." So what else is there? What about body liberation? Gloria Lucas of Nalgona Positivity Pride helps us understand the basic fundamentals of body liberation, as centering voices of the trans community, fat people, women of color. She tells us that body liberation goes beyond the surface of body image and into the root of the problem, which are power systems that make it difficult for people to live at peace in their bodies. How can we challenge these power systems and fight for body liberation? Because diet culture comes at us from all sides, Gloria recommends a multi-layered approach to fighting for body liberation, which includes challenging prejudices by being disruptors, when people are being hurt by suggestions on how they need to change their body. Checking in with those in our circle when they make fat-phobic comments about their own or other bodies. Getting involved in community efforts to raise visibility. Following the work of Black, Indigenous people of color around eating disorders and body image. Joining the fight for healthcare accessibility for all. Abolishing ICE and dismantling other systems of oppression. These are all ways that we can fight for body liberation. Gloria reminds us that diversity includes making space for other worldviews and for people who hold power to relinquish their power, to make room for voices that have so long been silenced and ignored. And how do we help ourselves recover from the harm diet culture has already done? On the subject of body image, Stephanie Yeboah, author and fat acceptance advocate, in her blog post, "Dear Body, I'm Sorry," urges us to stop apologizing to other people about our bodies and instead apologize to our bodies. Check out Yeboah's letter. Write your own. If you're brave enough, share it. We've already learned that increasing visibility and awareness is critical. As for eating disorders, in 2007, a study found that a sense of connectedness to the queer community was related to fewer current eating disorders, which suggests that feeling connected to the queer community can serve as a protection against eating disorders. To help facilitate this feeling of connectedness, the Gala Pride and Diversity Center has FED, a support group where LGBTQ+ adults who are struggling with disordered eating and body image can come together and form community. And because of generous support from community members like you, we will soon have an LGBTQ+ affirming eating disorder therapist leading the group, because we recognize there are significant barriers to treatment. Group members do not have to have a clinically diagnosed eating disorder to join. If the subject of this talk resonates with you, I encourage you to reach out to me at edehart@galacc.org for more information. Thank you for coming to my Pride Talk on diet culture and body image. I hope you feel a little more knowledgeable, a little less alone. Let's not punish our own or anyone else's body for not fitting into whatever diet culture approved aesthetic is being sold to us by society. Our bodies, like us, are just doing the best they can, and that's okay. We're enough.